Now there's a famous quote that gets bandied around the internet quite often by John Lennon. When I was 5 years old, my mum told me that happiness was the key to life. When I went to school, they asked me what I wanted to be when I was older. When I wrote down happy, they told me I didn't understand the assignment, and I told them they didn't understand life. Now this is a great quote superficially, because John Lennon was very successful. People tend to take it as particularly good, or gospel, if you like. The problem with this is that when you actually analyse the content of the quote rather than the authority who said it, I mean, it really doesn't stand up. Happiness is such a meaningless concept, because when you break it down and try to define it, well, not only will the definitions change between people, but it's almost difficult to describe happiness as a long-term concept. So we understand what it's like to be happy, you know, when it's on our birthday and we get presented with a nice surprise party, or buy something new, get married or have a baby. But this is a fleeting, very short-term experience in most people's understanding of happiness. So when you say about you want to be happy long-term, does that mean that you have this very distinct, elated feeling continuously for the rest of your life? Is that really something that you can achieve? Isn't that what heroin addicts are trying to achieve? Do they look like they're doing well? So as a long-term concept, it really doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Another interpretation of it is, well, maybe happiness long-term means less ups and downs. So, you know, you're less grumpy and you're less extremely happy, but generally you're content, as people like to say. If that is the case, then happiness is that extreme feeling. Isn't it completely redundant to refer to it as happiness if you're going to have less of that extreme feeling as you get more content? Another way people think about happiness in general is that they don't have invasive negative thoughts about their life. A lot of depression can be punctuated by these invasive thoughts about, you know, other people, your family, your job situation, yourself is often related to unhappiness. The problem with trying to eradicate these thoughts is that it's almost impossible. People have a train of thought which they dip into and witness, sometimes bubbling up in the self-consciousness, and it's not very straightforward to put a lid on these things, and any attempt to put a lid on them can only make people less happy. So there really is no way to sort of define happiness as a long-term concept in any sort of way that people are used to talking about it. Now, Buddhism has some insight into this, and some Buddhist teaching is about peace of mind being possible through avoiding craving or desire. They call it equanimity. The more pleasure you seek, you know, the more diminishing the returns of pleasure. Most people have a very intense, happiness-inducing experience and then spend a large part of the future trying to regain or retain that experience, be it, you know, a drug experience, a lifestyle experience, a food experience, a work experience, any kind of event, which is why addiction can be so cruel, because people have an initially fantastic high and then spend a relentless, rest of their lives committed to trying to retain that high, or retain some portion of it. So when you become desensitized to happiness, we call this hedonic adaptation. And hedonic adaptation is where your body or your mind generally adapts to these pleasant or unpleasant events and comes to terms with them very quickly, and your general happiness or reported happiness level goes back to whatever you were prior to the event. So a lot of lottery winners will report extreme happiness for the first few days after winning the lottery, but then very shortly afterwards they will then reset to what we call the hedonic set point, which is their general happiness level. Now, on the flip side, if somebody has a terrible life event happening to them, even though it does generally tend to take longer to revert back to the hedonic set point, a reversion is usually reached. So people generally go back to their original happiness level, or original reported happiness level. People don't just become desensitized to all kinds of pleasure as time goes on until people are just depressed. What seems to, or appears to happen, is that when people have particular interests or foci or things to focus on, they can be sensitized to differences within that sort of field or realm. So a good example of this is, most people like wine, drinking alcohol. But when you're a wine tasting, if you're into wine tasting, subtle differences between wines that may be undetectable to other people can be really huge in your mind. So you can be disgusted by one bottle of wine and really delighted by another. And people who aren't interested in wine tasting may not even be able to tell the difference. To them it may taste like Ribena with a bit of perfume in it. So whatever happiness is, people still report a level of happiness in a survey. The events in your life don't seem to have a great impact on your level of reported, general level of reported happiness. They obviously do have some impact, but it's not as big as people think. And just as much of an impact is had by your genes. So it seems that if your parents or grandparents report a certain level of happiness, you're much more likely to report a similar level of happiness than you are between unrelated people. So what's the lesson here? Are we not in control of our happiness? Well, that's not the message I'm trying to convey. We are not necessarily in control of our level of happiness, but we are in control of where we direct our attention. And it seems to me that if you want to have those extreme feelings of happiness and good experiences, trying to seek out experiences that are like ones that caused you great happiness before can often be unrewarding, but then finding an interest or a pursuit in which you can dig down and develop either a skill in or develop a real discrimination capability will lead to more happiness, or events or instances of you feeling extreme. So triumph and disaster are imposters, and that is part of growing up and being a man, according to Kipling, is recognising that. And I think that understanding how hedonic adaptation works is what Kipling was talking about when he wrote that poem. And if anything, worrying about the likelihood of really personal hardship or a devastating life event happening, actually worrying about it has more detrimental effects on your happiness than the actual event itself, which you're proven to recover from reasonably quickly and resume normal functions. So really, we don't need to worry about potential life-changing, devastating events because your brain has got it under control. My name's SwiftCase. Thanks for watching this video.